heard them scream. I didn't think it would be so hard.
You won't escape now.
The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of my auto shop. The sound echoed through the empty garage like a bang, but all I could focus on was the glowing screen of my phone. Your house, now! Your kids aren't safe! My name is Ethan Mercer, and I've been fixing cars in this godforsaken town for 15 years. I've seen plenty of weird crap in my time, drunk drivers who swear their steering wheels turn themselves, wives who key their husbands' Corvettes in perfect cursive, but nothing prepared me for that text message at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. The phone number was blocked. The message was all caps. And something in my gut, that same instinct that kept me alive during 2 tours in the Middle East, started screaming. I grabbed my keys and ran. The drive from my shop to our split-level house on Maple Street usually takes 12 minutes. I made it in 7, running 2 red lights and taking the corner onto our street so fast my pickup truck's tires squealed like a wounded animal. That's when I saw the police cars. 3 squad cars, their red and blue lights painting our quiet suburban street in colors that belonged in a nightmare. The ambulance was already there too, parked at an angle on our front lawn like the driver had been in a hurry. I ended the engine and stumbled out of my truck, my legs feeling like they were made of water. Mrs. Henderson from next door was standing on her porch in a bathrobe, her hand pressed to her mouth. She saw me and started crying harder. "Ethan," she called out, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry." The front door of my house was wide open. Yellow police tape fluttered in the evening breeze like party streamers from a nightmare. Through the doorway, I could see broken glass scattered across our hardwood floors and dark stains on the walls that made my stomach clench. "Sir, you need to stay back," a young police officer said, stepping into my path. His name tag read Martinez, and he looked like he was about 12 years old. "This is an active crime scene." "This is my house," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. "Those are my kids up there." Martinez's face went pale. He spoke into his radio, calling for Detective Sanchez, and within seconds, a heavy-set woman in a rumpled suit came jogging over. She had kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun, but the expression on her face made my blood turn to ice. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked. "I'm Detective Rosa Sanchez. I need you to prepare yourself for some very difficult news." Before she could continue, I heard Lauren's voice from inside the house. My wife was sobbing, great heaving sobs that sounded like they were tearing her apart from the inside. And there was another voice, too, deeper, trying to comfort her. "My brother Caleb." "They're both inside," Detective Sanchez said gently. "Your wife and your brother, they're shaken up, but they're physically unharmed." "And my kids?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer from the look in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer, we lost them both." The world tilted sideways. I grabbed onto Martinez's shoulder to keep from falling, my vision going black around the edges. Emma was only 8 years old. Jake had just turned 6 last month. We'd had a Batman-themed party in the backyard, and he'd worn his cape for 3 days straight. "How?" I whispered. Detective Sanchez guided me to sit on the bumper of one of the squad cars. "According to your wife and brother, 2 men broke into the house around 10:45. They were wearing masks, ski masks, dark clothing. Your brother arrived just as it was happening. He managed to scare them off, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I want to see them," I said, starting to stand up. "Mr. Mercer, I strongly advise against that. The scene upstairs it's not something you want to remember." But I was already pushing past her, past Martinez, through my front door and up the stairs that I'd climbed thousands of times before. The stairs where Emma used to slide down the banister even though Lauren always told her not to. The stairs where Jake would sit and push his toy cars through the spindles, making engine noises with his mouth. The hallway upstairs was a war zone. Family photos hung crooked on the walls, their glass cracked. The carpet was dark with stains that I refused to let my brain identify. And the doors to both kids' rooms stood open like screaming mouths. I made it exactly 3 steps down that hallway before my legs gave out completely. I dropped to my knees on the ruined carpet, and everything inside me just broke. Detective Sanchez found me there, 10 minutes later, still on my knees, staring at nothing. She helped me back downstairs, where Lauren and Caleb were waiting in the living room. Lauren looked like she'd been through a blender. Her blonde hair was matted with red stains, her designer blouse torn at the shoulder. She had a cut on her forehead and bruises on her arms that were already turning purple. When she saw me, she launched herself into my arms, sobbing against my chest. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I tried to protect them. I tried, but there were two of them, and they were so big, and I couldn't." "Hey," I said, stroking her hair with a shaking hand. "It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Caleb stood behind her, his expensive suit rumpled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. My brother had always been the successful one, the lawyer who drove a BMW and lived in a downtown condo that cost more than most people's houses. But right now he looked smaller somehow, older. "I got here as fast as I could," he said, his voice hoarse. "Lauren called me screaming about intruders. By the time I arrived, they were already upstairs. I chased them off, but..." He gestured helplessly at the destruction around us. "You saved my wife," I said, reaching out to grip his shoulder. "Thank you." Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, too fast for me to identify. Then he nodded and looked away. Detective Sanchez spent the next 2 hours asking questions. What time did the attack happen? Had we received any threats? Did we keep valuables in the house? Had we noticed anyone suspicious in the neighborhood? Lauren answered most of them, her voice getting stronger as she talked. She'd been downstairs watching television when she heard noises from upstairs. She'd gone to investigate and found 2 men in dark clothes and ski masks in Jake's room. They'd pushed her down, told her to stay quiet, but she'd screamed anyway. That's when she'd called Caleb, who lived only 15 minutes away. "Why Caleb?" Detective Sanchez asked. "Why not your husband or 911? Lauren's hand tightened on mine. "Ethan was at the shop. He works late most nights. And Caleb was closer. I wasn't thinking straight." It made sense. Sort of. Lauren had always been close to my family, sometimes closer than I was comfortable with. She and Caleb had bonded over their shared love of expensive restaurants and cultural events that I had zero interest in. I'd always figured it was harmless, just my wife and my brother being friends. By the time the police finished with their questions and the coroner's van had driven away, it was nearly 4 a.m. Caleb offered to put us up at his condo, since our house was now a crime scene. But Lauren wanted to go to a hotel instead. "I need to be somewhere neutral," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere that doesn't remind me of tonight." We ended up at the Hampton Inn on Route 9 in a room with 2 queen beds and a view of the parking lot. Lauren took a shower while I sat on the edge of one bed, staring at my hands and trying to process what had happened. My kids were dead. Emma, who wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Jake, who still believed in monsters under the bed but wasn't afraid of them, because Daddy was stronger than any monster. I was going to find the bastards who did this. And when I did, they were going to wish they'd never been born. That was my first mistake, assuming the monsters were strangers. The funeral was held on a gray Thursday morning at St. Michael's Catholic Church, the same church where Lauren and I had been married 9 years earlier, the same church where we'd had Emma and Jake baptized. The irony wasn't lost on me, sitting in that front pew and staring at 2 small caskets, while Father McKenna talked about God's plan and eternal peace. I wanted to stand up and tell him exactly what I thought about God's plan, but Lauren's hand was locked around mine like a vice, and I could feel the eyes of half the town on the back of my neck. So I sat there like a good little grieving father and let the priest's words wash over me like white noise. The whole town had turned out, it seemed. My auto shop customers, Lauren's friends from the country club, neighbors I barely knew by name. Even some of the guys I'd served with in the Middle East had driven down from Boston. The church was packed to standing room only, and there were news vans parked outside like vultures. Caleb sat in the pew directly behind us, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my truck. He'd been a rock throughout the whole ordeal, handling the funeral arrangements, dealing with the media, even helping Lauren pick out clothes for the kids. I should have been grateful. I was grateful. But something about the whole situation was starting to itch at me like a splinter under the skin. Maybe it was the way Lauren leaned on him a little too heavily when she thought I wasn't looking. Maybe it was how he always seemed to know exactly what she needed before she asked for it. Or maybe it was just my grief looking for someone to blame. After the service, we drove to Restwood Cemetery in a black limousine that Caleb had arranged. The burial was private, just family and a few close friends. I stood at the graveside, holding Lauren's hand while they lowered my children into the ground, and I made a silent promise to Emma and Jake that their butchers would pay for what they'd done. The reception was held at Caleb's condo, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Lauren's friends from the country club had organized the whole thing, bringing casseroles and sympathy cards and hushed conversations about how tragic it all was. I found myself standing alone on Caleb's balcony, nursing a beer and watching the sun set over the water, when Tina Morrison joined me. Tina was Lauren's best friend, a bottle-blonde real estate agent who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "How are you holding up, honey?" she asked, touching my arm with manicured fingers. "I'm breathing," I said. "That's about all I can manage right now." Tina nodded sympathetically. "Lauren's lucky to have you, and Caleb's been such a godsend through all this. I don't know what you two would have done without him." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific," Tina said quickly. "Just that he's been so attentive, so caring. It's wonderful to see siblings-in-law who are so close." She emphasized the word close in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Tina, if you have something to say, just say it. It's probably nothing," she said, glancing back through the sliding door to where Lauren and Caleb were standing together near the kitchen. "It's just that I've seen them together quite a bit lately. Before the incident, at lunch, at the country club, always deep in conversation about something." "They're friends," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they tasted wrong. "Of course they are," Tina agreed. "I'm sure that's all it is. I just thought you should know that people have been talking." She squeezed my arm again and went back inside, leaving me alone with my beer and a growing sense of unease. I watched through the window as Lauren laughed at something Caleb said, her hand resting on his chest for just a moment longer than necessary. People have been talking. In a town this size, people were always talking. But Tina Morrison didn't deal in idle gossip. She dealt in information. And the fact that she'd felt the need to warn me meant that whatever people were saying, it was serious enough to reach the ears of a grieving widower at his children's funeral reception. I went back inside and spent the rest of the evening watching my wife and my brother interact. Really watching, with the kind of attention to detail that had kept me alive in combat zones. And what I saw made my blood run cold. They moved around each other like dancers who'd rehearsed the steps. When Lauren needed a tissue, Caleb was there with one before she asked. When Caleb's drink was empty, Lauren refilled it without being asked. They communicated with glances and small gestures, a private language that excluded everyone else in the room, including me. The last guest left around 10 o'clock. Caleb offered to drive us back to our hotel, but I insisted on taking a cab. I needed time to think, and I couldn't do that with my brother's cologne filling the car and Lauren sitting between us like some kind of bridge I couldn't cross. Back at the Hampton Inn, Lauren collapsed on the bed, fully clothed, and was asleep within minutes. The stress and grief had taken their toll on her, and she'd barely slept since the night of the homicides. I sat in the chair by the window, watching her sleep and trying to make sense of the thoughts swirling through my head. My wife and my brother. It was insane. It was impossible. It made a horrible kind of sense. Lauren had married me straight out of college when I was still wearing my uniform, and she was impressed by the idea of a war hero. But I'd been out of the Army for 8 years now, and the hero worship had worn off. I was just a guy who fixed cars and came home covered in grease every night. I didn't go to charity galas or wine tastings. I didn't know the difference between a Merlot and a Cabernet, and I didn't care to learn. Caleb, on the other hand, was everything I wasn't. Sophisticated, successful, wealthy. He could take Lauren to 5-star restaurants and Broadway shows. He could buy her jewelry that cost more than I made in a month. He could give her the kind of life she'd always wanted but had settled for less when she married me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Lauren's social media posts from the past few months. There were dozens of photos from charity events, art gallery openings, wine tastings, and in more than half of them, Caleb was right there beside her, looking like the perfect escort. Where was I in these photos? Working late at the shop, apparently. Always working late while my wife lived it up with my brother. The more I thought about it, the more pieces started falling into place. Lauren's sudden interest in cultural events that had never appealed to her before. The way she'd started dressing differently, more expensively. The credit card bills that had been climbing steadily higher each month, and the way she'd called Caleb first on the night our children were ended. I spent the rest of the night sitting in that chair, staring out at the parking lot, and trying to convince myself that I was wrong. That grief was making me paranoid, that my wife and my brother couldn't possibly be having an affair. But by the time the sun came up, I knew I needed proof. One way or the other, I needed to know the truth. Because if Lauren and Caleb were sleeping together, it changed everything about the night my children died. And if they were involved in the homicide somehow, I was going to destroy them both. I hired private investigator Sarah Mallory on a rainy Monday morning, exactly 1 week after I buried my children. Her office was located above a Chinese restaurant on Main Street, and it smelled like sweet and sour pork and disappointment. Mallory was a former Boston police detective who'd moved to our little town after a serious incident that she didn't want to talk about. She was in her late 40s with graying brown hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to see right through whatever bees you were trying to sell her. "So, you think your wife is cheating on you with your brother?" she said, leaning back in her desk chair and studying me like I was a particularly interesting bug. "And you think this affair might be connected to your children's homicides?" "I know how it sounds," I said, "but something isn't right about that night. The timeline doesn't add up, and neither does Lauren's story." Mallory picked up a pen and started taking notes. "Walk me through it again. Everything you remember." I told her about the text message that had sent me racing home, about finding the police cars and the ambulance, about Lauren's injuries and Caleb's convenient arrival just in time to scare off the intruders. "This text message," Mallory said. "You still have it?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. She copied down the exact wording and the timestamp, then sat back and tapped her pen against her lips. 11:32 p.m., she said. "And what time did your wife say the break-in occurred?" "Around 10:45. So someone sent you a warning text almost an hour after the attack supposedly happened?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Yeah, I guess so." "And your wife called your brother instead of 911 or you?" "She said she wasn't thinking straight, that Caleb lived closer." Mallory made another note. "How close?" "About 15 minutes away, maybe 20 with traffic." "And how long does it take to drive from your auto shop to your house?" 12 minutes, I said automatically. 7 if you're in a hurry. "So if your wife had called you instead of your brother, you would have been there first." The cold feeling in my stomach was spreading to my chest. "Yeah, I would have." Mallory set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Mr. Mercer, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is there any part of you that suspects your wife and brother might have been involved in your children's deaths?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded tool. I opened my mouth to say no, of course not. That was insane. But the word wouldn't come. "I don't know," I said finally. "I hope not. God, I hope not. But something isn't right, and I need to know what it is." Mallory nodded. "My rate is $500 a day plus expenses. I'll need a retainer of $2,000 up front. And Mr. Mercer, if I find evidence that your wife and brother were involved in those homicides, are you prepared to handle that information?" I thought about Emma's laugh and Jake's bedtime stories. I thought about the promise I'd made at their graveside. "I'm prepared," I said. Mallory got to work immediately. Within 2 days, she'd uncovered a paper trail that made my worst suspicions look optimistic. Credit card records showed that Lauren and Caleb had been having lunch together at expensive restaurants at least twice a week for the past 6 months. Hotel receipts from business trips that Caleb had supposedly taken alone, except the rooms were always booked for 2 people. "They've been careful," Mallory told me when she called with an update. "But not careful enough. I've got photos of them together at the Riverside Inn last Tuesday. They checked in at 2 p.m. and didn't leave until after 6. "The day before the funeral," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I'm sorry, Ethan, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." But it was exactly what I'd expected to hear. The affair explained so much. Lauren's recent behavior, the money that had been disappearing from our accounts, the way she and Caleb moved around each other like they shared secrets. What it didn't explain was why my children were dead. I met with Detective Sanchez the next day at the police station. She looked tired, like she'd been working too many double shifts, and there were coffee stains on her blouse. "We're still investigating," she told me, spreading crime scene photos across her desk. "But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Mercer. We don't have much to go on. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence, no witnesses except your wife and brother." "What about the neighbors? Didn't anyone see anything?" "Mrs. Henderson heard shouting around 10:45, but she didn't see anyone coming or going. The Kowalskis were out of town. The Johnsons had their television turned up too loud to hear anything." I studied the photos, trying to see them with fresh eyes. The broken glass in the entryway, The overturned furniture in the living room. The dark stains on the hallway carpet that I refused to let myself think about. "Detective," I said carefully, "what if the intruders weren't strangers? What if this was someone the family knew?" Sanchez looked up from her notes. "What makes you ask that?" "There's no sign of forced entry. The front door wasn't damaged, and neither were any of the windows. Either these guys were professional lockpicks, or someone let them in. Your wife says she heard noises and went upstairs to investigate. She thinks they might have come in through the back door, which was unlocked." "Lauren never leaves doors unlocked," I said. "She's paranoid about home security, has been ever since we moved to that neighborhood." Sanchez made a note. "I'll have the techs take another look at the back door. See if there's any evidence we missed." I left the police station feeling like I was drowning in questions without answers. The affair was real. Mallory's evidence was solid. But did that mean Lauren and Caleb had ended my children? And if so, why? The answer came to me 3 days later when I was going through Lauren's things at the hotel room. She was downstairs at the Continental breakfast, and I was looking for her insurance papers so I could file a claim for the clothes and personal items we'd lost in the house. That's when I found the life insurance policies. Both kids had policies worth $250,000 each, $500,000 total, with Lauren listed as the sole beneficiary. The policies had been purchased 8 months ago, right around the time the affair had started. I sat on the hotel bed holding those papers in my shaking hands, and everything clicked into place. Lauren and Caleb had been planning this for months. They'd taken out insurance policies on Emma and Jake, then staged a home invasion to cash in. My wife had ended our children for money. I was still sitting there when Lauren came back from breakfast, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a Danish she'd saved for me. She took one look at my face and knew that I knew. "Ethan," she said, setting down the coffee with trembling hands, "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, holding up the insurance papers. "Can you explain why you took out life insurance policies on our children without telling me? Can you explain why you called Caleb instead of me on the night they died? Can you explain why you've been sleeping with my brother for the past 6 months?" Lauren's face went white, then red, then white again. She sat down heavily in the chair by the window, and for a moment I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Instead, she started to cry. "I never meant for this to happen," she sobbed. "Caleb and I, it just happened. We tried to stop, but we couldn't. And the insurance policies, I was just trying to be responsible, to make sure the kids would be taken care of if something happened to us." "Something happened to them, and all right," I said, standing up. "And you made sure it did." "No!" Lauren jumped to her feet, her eyes wild. "Ethan, you have to believe me. I would never hurt Emma and Jake. Never. I love them more than my own life, but not more than Caleb's money." She slapped me then, hard enough to make my ears ring. I just stood there and took it. Because part of me felt like I deserved it. I'd failed to protect my children. I'd been so busy working late and ignoring the signs that I'd missed what was happening right under my nose. But I wasn't going to fail them again. "Pack your things," I told Lauren, "and we're going home." "Home? Ethan, the house is still a crime scene. Not our house." Say it out, "You're home. With Caleb. Because if you're still here when I get back from the police station, I'm going to do something we'll both regret." Lauren stared at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she nodded and started throwing her clothes into a suitcase. I walked out of that hotel room and drove straight to Detective Sanchez's office. It was time to tell her everything I'd learned. It was time to get justice for Emma and Jake. It was time to destroy the people who destroyed my family. Detective Sanchez listened to everything I had to say without interrupting. I laid out Mallory's evidence of the affair, showed her the insurance policies, explained my theory about how Lauren and Caleb had staged the whole thing. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and rubbed her temples like she had a headache. "This is all circumstantial," she said finally. "The affair, the insurance policies, even the timeline discrepancies. None of it proves that your wife and brother ended your children." "What about the unlocked back door? What about the fact that there was no forced entry?" "Still circumstantial. A good defense attorney would tear this apart in court." I leaned forward in my chair. "So what are you saying, that they're going to get away with it?" "I'm saying we need more evidence. Something concrete that directly links them to the homicides. Without that, the district attorney won't even consider filing charges." I left the police station feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. I had proof that my wife was cheating, proof that she'd taken out insurance policies on our dead children. proof that her story about the night of the homicides didn't add up. But none of it was enough to put her and Caleb behind bars where they belonged. Fine, if the law couldn't give me justice, I'd have to get it myself. I drove to Caleb's condo and used the spare key he'd given me years ago, back when we were still brothers instead of whatever we were now. The place was empty, Caleb was at his law office, and Lauren was probably out spending my money at some expensive spa. I planted recording devices in the living room, bedroom, and kitchen. Tiny digital recorders that Mallory had given me, the kind that could pick up conversations from across a room. If Lauren and Caleb were going to confess to what they'd done, I was going to be listening. Then I went home. The police had finally released the crime scene, and I stood in my front hallway looking at the dark stains on the carpet and the chalk outlines on the walls. The house felt dead, like something essential had been sucked out of it along with my children's lives. I climbed the stairs to Emma's room and sat on her bed, surrounded by her stuffed animals and princess posters. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, except for the dark stains on the carpet where she'd died. I picked up her favorite teddy bear, the one she'd had since she was a baby, and held it against my chest. "I'm going to get them, sweetheart," I whispered. "I promise." I did the same thing in Jake's room, sitting among his toy cars and superhero action figures. His Batman cape was still hanging on the back of his door, and I took it down and held it to my face, breathing in the scent of my little boy. That's when I heard the front door open. I made it to the top of the stairs just as Lauren and Caleb walked into the hallway below. They stopped when they saw me, their faces going pale in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Ethan," Lauren said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you were here." "It's my house," I said, starting down the stairs. "Or did you forget that while you were shacking up with my brother?" Caleb stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Look, Ethan, I know you're upset." "Upset," I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make them both flinch. "My children are dead, my wife is a cheating hoe, and my brother is a backstabbing piece of crap. Upset doesn't begin to cover it." "Don't talk to her like that," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "Lauren's been through enough." "Has she? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she got everything she wanted. The kids are out of the way, she's got $500,000 in insurance money coming, and she's got you to keep her warm at night. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me." Lauren started crying again, those big crocodile tears that had fooled me for so many years. "Ethan, please, you have to believe me. I didn't end our children. I love them. But not enough to stay faithful to their father. That's different, and you know it. What happened between Caleb and me, it wasn't supposed to happen. We tried to fight it, but what? You couldn't keep your legs closed long enough to think about your family?" Caleb took another step forward, his face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Ethan. I won't let you talk to her like that." "You won't let me?" I laughed again. "That's rich coming from the man who's been sleeping with my wife behind my back for 6 months. "It wasn't like that," Caleb said. "We didn't plan for this to happen. We fell in love." "Love?" The word tasted like poison in my mouth. "You call ending 2 innocent children love?" "We didn't homicide anyone," Lauren screamed, her composure finally cracking. "How can you even think that? They were my babies too. Your babies that you insured for $500,000. Your babies that you left alone upstairs while you let 2 strangers into our house. I didn't let anyone in. They broke in through the back door that you never leave unlocked, the back door that showed no signs of forced entry." Lauren and Caleb exchanged a look, and I saw something pass between them. Fear, maybe, or guilt. "I think you should leave," Caleb said quietly. "Lauren's staying here now, and you're not welcome. This isn't your house, Caleb. It's mine. Lauren can stay if she wants, but she'll be sleeping alone, because I'm done being the fool in this little triangle." I pushed past them and headed for the door, but Lauren grabbed my arm. "Where are you going?" she asked. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then up at her face. She was still beautiful, even with tears streaming down her cheeks and guilt written in the lines around her eyes. I'd loved this woman for 9 years. I'd given her everything I had, and she'd thrown it all away for my brother and an insurance payout. "I'm going to prove what you did," I told her. "And when I do, you're both going to pay for it." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I had work to do. The recordings from Caleb's condo were a gold mine. Over the next 3 days, I listened to hours of conversations between my wife and my brother. They talked about the affair, about their plans for the future, about how they were going to split the insurance money and start a new life together. But they never talked about the homicides, not directly. It wasn't until the fourth day that I heard what I was looking for. Lauren and Caleb were in bed together, and they thought they were safe to speak freely. "I keep having nightmares," Lauren said, her voice muffled by pillows. "About that night, about what we did." "It's over now," Caleb replied. "We did what we had to do, and now we can be together. The kids, they're in a better place. But what if Ethan finds out? What if he figures out that He won't. There's no evidence. We were careful. The insurance policies, lots of parents take out insurance policies on their children. It's not proof of anything. But the timing, coincidence, bad luck. The police have already written it off as a home invasion gone wrong." There was a long pause, and then Lauren spoke again. "I never thought it would be so hard, watching them die, hearing them scream for their mommy. You did what you had to do," Caleb said again. "For us, for our future." I stopped the recording and sat back in my chair, my hands shaking with rage. There it was. Not a full confession, but close enough. Lauren and Caleb had ended my children, and they were planning to cash in on the insurance money and start a new life together. I made copies of the recording and took them straight to Detective Sanchez. She listened to the whole thing with a grim expression on her face, then called in the district attorney. Within 6 hours, there were arrest warrants out for Lauren Mercer and Caleb Mercer on charges of first-degree homicide. They picked up Lauren at the house that evening. She was cooking dinner, wearing an apron that said "World's Best Mom," a Mother's Day gift from Emma 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Caleb was arrested at his law office the next morning. He was in the middle of a client meeting when Detective Sanchez walked in with handcuffs. The whole town was buzzing with the news. The grieving mother and the devoted uncle arrested for ending 2 innocent children for insurance money. It was the kind of story that made national headlines. And within days, there were news crews camped outside the courthouse and reporters knocking on my door at all hours. I didn't talk to any of them. I had nothing to say to the media, but I had plenty to say to Lauren and Caleb. The trial was set for 6 months later. In the meantime, they were both held without bail, locked up in the county jail like the animals they were. I visited Lauren once, just to look her in the eye and let her know that I knew exactly what she'd done. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that made her look pale and washed out, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked nothing like the sophisticated woman who'd been living it up with my brother. "I'm innocent," she told me through the glass partition. "Ethan, you have to believe me. I would never hurt our children. I heard the recording, Lauren. I heard you talking about watching them die." Her face crumpled. "That's not what I meant. I was talking about being there when it happened, about not being able to save them." "You're a liar," I said calmly. "You're a homicider and a liar, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison." "Ethan, please, I love you." "I've always loved you." "No," I said, standing up to leave. "You loved money, and now you're going to pay for it." I walked out of that jail and never looked back. Lauren and Caleb had made their choice, and now they were going to live with the consequences. But I wasn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February, exactly 8 months after Emma and Jake were ended. The courthouse was packed with reporters, curious townspeople, and court TV cameras. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, wearing my best suit and a tie that Emma had picked out for me the previous Father's Day. The prosecution's case was solid but not airtight. They had the insurance policies, evidence of the affair, the timeline discrepancies, and my recordings. But as Caleb's expensive defense attorney was quick to point out, most of it was circumstantial. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the defense attorney said during his opening statement, "you're going to hear a lot of speculation and innuendo over the next few weeks. You're going to hear about an extramarital affair, about insurance policies, about supposedly suspicious behavior. But what you're not going to hear is any direct evidence that my clients ended those children, because they didn't do it." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Morrison, painted a different picture. She walked the jury through the timeline of that terrible night, pointing out all the inconsistencies in Lauren and Caleb's stories. She showed them the insurance policies and the hotel receipts. She played my recordings for the courtroom, and I watched several jurors flinch when they heard Lauren talking about watching the children die. "This was a carefully planned homicide," Morrison told the jury. "The defendants took out life insurance policies on these innocent children, then staged a home invasion to cash in. They ended Emma and Jake Mercer in cold blood, and they did it for money. The defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case, arguing that the recordings were taken out of context and that the insurance policies were just responsible financial planning. They brought in character witnesses who testified about what loving parents Lauren and Caleb appeared to be. But the recordings were damning, especially when combined with all the other evidence. And when Lauren took the stand in her own defense, she fell apart under cross-examination. "Mrs. Mercer," Morrison said, "you testified that you called your brother-in-law instead of your husband on the night of the homicides because he lived closer. Is that correct?" "Yes," Lauren said, her voice barely audible. "But your husband's auto shop is only 12 minutes from your house, while Mr. Caleb Mercer's condo is 15 to 20 minutes away. Isn't that right?" Lauren hesitated. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was in shock." "You were in shock, but you were thinking clearly enough to call someone for help. And you chose to call the man you'd been having an affair with instead of your husband, the man you'd been meeting at hotels twice a week for 6 months. It wasn't like that." Morrison played the recording again, the one where Lauren talked about watching the children die. "Mrs. Mercer, can you explain to the jury what you meant when you said, 'I never thought it would be so hard, watching them die, hearing them scream for their mommy'?" Lauren broke down completely. She sobbed on the witness stand, claiming that she'd been talking about her nightmares, about the trauma of witnessing the attack. But her explanation sounded hollow even to her own ears. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, their faces were grim, guilty on all counts. Lauren collapsed when she heard the verdict. Caleb just sat there, staring straight ahead, his face blank. I felt something inside my chest loosen for the first time in 8 months. It wasn't happiness. I didn't think I'd ever be truly happy again. But it was justice. The sentencing hearing was held a month later. Both Lauren and Caleb were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they were led away in shackles, Lauren turned to look at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. I didn't respond. Sorry wasn't going to bring back my children. But I wasn't done with them yet. Prison, it turned out, was not kind to child butchers. Lauren was attacked twice in her first year, once by her cellmate, and once by a group of women in the shower. She spent 3 months in solitary confinement for her own protection. Caleb didn't fare much better. Word got around the men's prison that he'd ended his own niece and nephew for money. Inmates had their own code of justice, and child butchers were at the bottom of the hierarchy. I made sure to keep tabs on both of them through contacts I'd made during my military service. I wanted to know that they were suffering. I wanted to know that every day in that place was a living nightmare for them. And I wanted to make sure it stayed that way. I used some of the insurance money Lauren had signed over her rights to me as part of a plea agreement to hire a private security firm, not to protect Lauren and Caleb, but to make sure they never got out. The firm monitored their appeals, their parole hearings, their every move within the prison system. I also used the money to set up a foundation in Emma and Jake's memory, dedicated to preventing child misuse and supporting families affected by violence. It was the kind of thing my children would have supported if they'd lived long enough to understand it. But mostly, I used the money to make Lauren and Caleb's lives as miserable as possible. I hired inmates in both prisons to keep an eye on them, not to hurt them. I wasn't interested in making them martyrs, but to make sure they never forgot what they'd done, to make sure that every day they woke up, someone was there to remind them that they were child butchers who deserved everything they got. I sent them letters sometimes on Emma and Jake's birthdays and on the anniversary of their deaths. Not threatening letters, those would have violated prison mail policies. Just reminders of what they'd lost, what they'd thrown away, what they'd destroyed. Dear Lauren, I wrote on Emma's 9th birthday. Emma would have been 9 years old today. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She loved horses and unicorns and strawberry ice cream. She would have been in 4th grade now, learning about fractions and state capitals. Instead, she's dead, and you're in prison where you belong. I never signed the letters, but I knew they got them, and I knew they understood who was sending them. 5 years after the trial, Caleb died in prison. Officially, it was a heart attack. Unofficially, word was that he'd been beaten to death by 3 inmates who'd decided that child butchers didn't deserve to live. I didn't attend his funeral. Neither did anyone else from our family. Lauren lasted 2 more years before she hanged herself in her cell using bedsheets. She left a note confessing to the homicides and apologizing to me, but I threw it away without reading the whole thing. I didn't need her apology. I needed her dead, and now she was. I stood at her grave in the prison cemetery, looking down at the simple headstone that bore only her name and dates. No loving epitaph, no beloved wife and mother, just the bare facts of her existence. I hope you're paying for what you did, I said quietly. Both of you. Then I walked away and never looked back. Emma and Jake were finally at peace. Their butchers were dead, their father was free, and justice had been served. It hadn't brought my children back, but it had given me something to live for during the darkest years of my life. And now, finally, it was over. I drove home to the house I'd rebuilt from the ground up, erasing every trace of that terrible night. I'd turned Emma's room into a library, and Jake's room into a workshop where I restored classic cars in my spare time. The house was quiet now, but it was no longer haunted. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on my back porch, watching the sun set over the town where I'd lived my entire life. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work at the auto shop. I'd fix cars and joke with customers and live the quiet life of a man who'd seen too much but survived it all. Lauren and Caleb had taken everything from me. My children, my marriage, my trust in family. But they hadn't taken my life, and they hadn't taken my capacity for justice. In the end, that had been enough.